The Royal Navy of England has ever been its greatest defense and ornament. It is its ancient and natural strength, the floating bulwark of the island. Sir William Blackstone. Forever throughout history, civilizations have hinged on their maritime prowess. It can lead to their downfall or to their success. The establishment of a functional navy was a necessity for any civilization wishing to brave the tides of change, vital to its development and security. In the Roman Republic, the Korean Empire, and the Norse tribes, it was their navies that ensured not only their survival, but their continued prosperity. Rome, 260 BCE. The Carthaginians were winning the Punic War. Their massive fleets dwarfed those of Rome, and their sailors had years of experience over the hastily trained Roman rowers. They have ruled the Mediterranean for years, while Rome is still a newcomer to the scene. However, in the span of a few short decades, Rome became the center of power in the Mediterranean, subduing the Carthaginians and becoming the rulers of the known world. How? From its conception on the seven hills of Rome, the Roman Republic has always been a land-based society. Every part about it, from its massive road network to its professional armies, lent itself to being the best on land. Rome had such a distaste for the water that seafarers were considered second-class citizens, and their sea gods were treated with disdain. Their dislike for ships in the sea had become so prevalent in the century before the necessity of a navy had imposed itself upon Rome. Even when the navy was built, it was still considered just an addition to the army, and its members, like those of the auxiliary, were not accorded the same respect as full legionnaires. The inception of the Roman navy came with war with their biggest rival, Carthage. For years and years the Carthaginians dominated the western Mediterranean, with immense fleets of triremes and quadriremes full of experienced rowers and skippers who would outmaneuver and ram into any ship that they encountered. So when the Romans went to war, they needed to find a way to have an effective navy to combat and counteract the Carthaginians, or they would pay the price in blood. What they came up with showcased Roman expertise at the height of their republic civilization. First, the Romans needed ships. Like they did with so many other aspects of their culture, they adapted theirs from other civilizations. This was an important value that the Romans lived by. Take what other people know and adapt it to suit their own purposes. They used a beach Phoenician trireme as a template for their entire navy, but they soon improved its design by increasing its size and finding ways to having more and more rowers. They also improved upon Carthaginian tactics through the invention of the corvus, a spiked bridge that they would deploy on the prows of their ships. Instead of naval battles being ramming competitions, the Romans would drop the weapon on enemy ships, trapping, boarding, and capturing them. This way they used their superior melee troops from their armies to their advantage. They further adapted the knowledge and values of other civilizations to their own benefit. Using their superior technological prowess with siege engines, they were able to equip their ships with weapons such as ballistae, scorpions, and onagers. They even manufactured mobile and collapsible towers to give their troops advantage over the enemies. They transformed and improved upon centuries of research by their neighbors, adapting and improving whatever they came across. This drive, this fanatical ideology to constantly improve not only your own but all technology, to conform to your own ideals, was uniquely Roman. Their improvements, however, would not be enough to defeat the massive Carthaginian fleet bent on destroying Rome. Even with large ships full to the brim with fighting men, hurling projectiles at the enemy, the Carthaginians could still row circles around the Romans, and their rams could still plow through the weak floors of their ships. So, Rome went to even further lengths to demonstrate their resolve to obliterate this threat from the face of the earth. First, the Romans needed more ships. Remarkably, and against all odds, they were able to build over 100 ships and train over 30,000 men in the span of 2 short months, exemplifying their culture's emphasis on hard work. That work ethic was also shown by the rowers on the ships, who, through their own personal motivation, would join in on melee confrontations. According to important historians of their time, such as Livy, by throwing themselves into combat, the rowers tried to control their own fate and change the tide of battle. That is a perfect illustration of how the Romans did not want to be whisked away on the tides of fate, but would rather be the masters of their own. every Roman was also expected to put the greater good above their own. That drive to help Rome, and not just themselves, was seen through how nearly all of the wealthy families in Rome paid an inconceivably large sum of money, through their own desire and out of their own pockets, in order to fund the construction of a third Roman war fleet. By giving up their own wealth to help Rome in an act of pure selflessness, they became a perfect example of a Roman citizen, putting Rome's needs above his or her own. Even their individual battle tactics showcased Roman culture. By fighting as one cohesive unit, using each other's overlapping fields of fire and attack, the Romans would create a nearly impenetrable wall of ships that forced the Carthaginians into rash and decidedly deadly courses of action. In order to carry out such difficult maneuvers, every rower had to follow the beat, and every centurion, ship's captain, had to follow his commander's orders. That tactic proved the importance that the role of order and adherence to a strict hierarchy played in Roman society. Further, the fact that the chain of command is purely male-dominated is indicative of the patriarchal nature of their society, and how their culture placed men in a dominant role, tasked with protecting Rome. In summation, the Roman navy, as it gallantly defended Rome and all of its holdings, perfectly reflected upon its culture. The Roman navy wasn't just a tool or mechanism for war. It also played a key role in the maintenance of the civilization as a whole. The Roman Republic and later Empire was incredibly large, spanning the entirety of the Mediterranean Sea. It relied upon its interdependence across all of its territories, and needed its navy to ensure that. Although many may credit the expansive road network as the primary transportation of goods and power across the Republic, it was in fact its seaborne trade routes. As such, the navy became the defense of the basic economic and political structure of Rome. The economic structure of Rome was based on a series of trading cities across the Republic that would share its resources with one another in order to ensure its continued existence. The only way to transport most resources, such as timber, stone, and men, across long distances is via, no pun intended, the sea. The navy protected the various trade routes against a veritable hodgepodge of enemies, ranging from ferocious Sicilian pirates, who even sacked Rome port of Ostia, to Black Sea raiders. By doing so, they ensured the continual flow of resources across the Republic, thus ensuring its strength. The political structure of the Republic centered around the Senate being able to provide for its citizens. Once that fails, a plebeian uprising is inevitable. Rome, with a population far exceeding 1 million people, requires a massive amount of food to survive, most of which comes through cross-Mediterranean shipping routes from Egypt. Whenever that trade is broken, as happened in 66 BCE by Sicilian pirates, disaster strikes. A famine swept over the Italian peninsula, and revolts and rebellions spread like wildfire. As Rome was crumbling under this pirate blockade, a rising naval commander, Pompey the Great, rebuilt the Roman navy and ensured that people would continue to follow the status quo by crushing the pirate army. It also led to his rise as a political figure and ensured his seat on the first Roman triumvirate. Rome's navy ensured the continuation of, and subsequently led to the dismantle of, the Roman political structure. Overall, the Roman navy was a powerful force that expanded, protected, and held the Romans together for centuries. It created heroes and leaders amongst the populace, even though it was greatly feared. It projected Roman values, cultures, and ideals when protecting its economic and political structure in a new way that allowed Rome to triumph against their greatest enemies. It enabled the infamous words uttered by Caio, "Let Carthage burn," and if it was not for the navy, Rome itself may have burned, and the tides of history would be forever changed. Korea, during the Joseon era, a peninsula just decades before ruled by a puppet government installed by the ruthless Mongol Empire, a fledgling dynasty barely in its infancy, inheriting a failing and politically weakened country. Within the following centuries, it will have established itself as the dominant force within the East, and that factor that allowed this remarkable transformation to occur? Korea's naval prowess. Following the 15th century, an incredible emphasis had been placed on the development of a powerful naval force. From a geographical point of view, Korea is a peninsula, surrounded on three sides by water. As trade generates a large portion of Korea's annual revenue, it was of paramount importance for a functional fleet to be constructed as soon as possible. Another concern of Joseon Korea was Japanese piracy, one of the many factors that had brought the previous dynasty to its knees. Both the immediate military and economic threat of the pirates and the plethora of environmental factors influenced the design and construction of Korea's navy. Examining specifically the coastline of Korea, one finds a massive number of small islands adjacent to the mainland. This is indicative of an incredibly rocky and thus treacherous coast. As such, it would have been necessary that their ships be appropriately navigable and nimble as to avoid beaching themselves on the many rocks and sandbars surrounding the coast. Additionally, the ships would have been influenced by the potential profit and usefulness of their domestic use. Korea has several major rivers running down its length, including the Nangkong, Han, Guem, and Imjin rivers, all of which are used to transport goods and people internally, as well as providing speedy movement to the larger surrounding seas. Thus, the Korean vessels must have been, in addition to being navigable, being able to move within the narrow and sometimes shallow confines of the rivers. The design and function of the Korean Navy was the more obvious and admittedly more important military concern for the neighboring powers. Early in the Joseon, the only major naval threat came from the Japanese pirates. The pirates, employing techniques and strategies similar to the Vikings, focusing exclusively on raiding, attacked quickly, hitting coastal cities and unprotected trade and merchant ships. The Korean Navy, at this early point in the era, existed almost entirely to secure their maritime trade routes in the face of the pirate threat. The Koreans were able to successfully defend and protect their country and their livelihood, largely due not only to their ships, but their powerful naval weaponry and inspiring leadership. Before we discuss the particulars of Korean naval weaponry, we must first examine the single substance which made it all possible: gunpowder. Originally, the method and ingredients of gunpowder were a precious secret held only by the Chinese, who rationed the amount they sold to Korea, Japan, and the wider world. The Chinese had always extremely amicable political relationship with Korea, although not close enough to share the black powder formula. However, taking advantage of their intimate trade-based relationship, Chu Mu-seon, a Korean thinker and scientist, bribed a Han Dynasty merchant into disclosing the secret behind gunpowder and even basic Chinese cannon technology. With this, the Korean Navy grew many times more powerful than before. One of the most interesting and certainly unique gunpowder-based weapons of the Koreans was the hwacha. The hwacha was an archaic form of a projectile launcher, but with a twist. It fired up to 200 singjiang, or fire arrows. These singjiang were essentially early rockets, with an attached black powder-filled tube that could be ignited to generate massive thrust. Additionally, the arrows could be constructed so they would explode and spread fire upon impact. The hwacha and singjiang were initially developed to provide an advantage against the speedy vessels of the Japanese pirates, but were later used during actual military conflicts. The hwacha is in of itself a near-perfect illustration of the traditional and non-traditional Korean ideology and ideas, which allowed them to take a piece of foreign technology, analyze it, and improve it to a degree where it has truly become unique to their country. Of course, weapons are only as good as the hands guiding them. With this said, the soldiers in the Korean Navy were incredibly disciplined, but equally important, they were unbelievably loyal. The most prominent aspect of ideology present in the Korean maritime forces is the Navy's fervent devotion and patriotism. The epitome of this unconditional loyalty was, of course, Admiral Yi Sun-shin, the most famous military commander in Korean history. More than once he was sent by his government to battle fleets of Japanese ships, often many times the size of his own forces. Despite this, not only did Yi Sun-shin, but all the members under his command remained and fought to the death. Desertion under Admiral Yi was likely unheard of. It is said that Yi inspired all of his troops to an incredible degree, as he was known to fight alongside them, guide them successfully, and even fulfill final requests personally. Admiral Yi had enormous devotion to the Korean government, instilled through many years of military service, and so, in turn, his troops who admired him followed his lead and placed their loyalty in the emperor. Truly, without Admiral Yi Sun-shin and the devotion he inspired, the Korean peninsula would have been long since fallen to the ruthless Japanese military. In the end, the Korean Navy was essential to the very survival of the country itself, protecting the citizens, and equally important, the trade from invading Japanese pirates and marauding armies. This defense would have been impossible without the close political and economic relationship with China that allowed Koreans to uncover the secrets of gunpowder, as well as their unique ideology that generated unconditional loyalty under Admiral Yi Sun-shin and enabled the Korean Navy to implement and develop foreign technology to an incredible innovations that they could truly call their own. The Vikings during the Dark Ages invaded and raided many so-called feudal European towns and cities, a profitable venture known to be the lifeblood of the infamous warriors. This usually unstable revenue source on which the entire civilization was structured upon was only sustainable due to the incredible and world-renowned Viking navy. Although much praise is due to the deadly fighters who ran the forces, the Vikings as we know them today would not have existed without the remarkable longship. The longship's length allowed for extremely efficient troop transport, meaning that less ships needed to be made in the first place. The shallow and especially widened hull, or ship frame, allowed the vessels to be fast and to be ridden in shallow waters, which would have been the case with various inland rivers and coastal areas. The longships were also double-headed, with the bow and stern at both the front and back of the ship, allowing for the quick reversion of the ship to escape any unfavorable situation. To streamline the vessel's already impressive agility, oars were fitted throughout its length, providing maximum use of available manpower possible. Ultimately, the longships were constructed almost entirely to serve as an effective transportation to and from an extensive plethora of raiding campaigns. The Vikings' need to resort to piracy ended in the late Middle Ages when the European center of trade shifted into the Baltic Sea region, just east of Scandinavia, due to the formation of the Hanseatic League. The league consisted of around 200 coastal towns and cities that boosted the exchange of raw materials, food, and minerals from the east with the rich commodities and industrial produce in the west. The Vikings, already rich from the decades of massively successful, albeit savage, pillaging, used their wealth and established themselves firmly as a regional trade powerhouse. Many other parties sought to do business with these northerners, attempting to gain a measure of their profits for themselves. Once again, the longships proved their worth, acting as modified storage vessels used to move valuable goods from one place to another. Of course, none of the economic success would have occurred if the Vikings' navy had not been as powerful as it was. The navy, in addition to having an irreplaceable effect on the Scandinavian economy, is in and of itself a great illustration of Viking political organization. For instance, large gatherings of naval forces may have appeared to outsiders as an organized single cohesive unit, but in reality this could not be further from the truth. Individual clusters of longships were bound by feudally to a number of chieftains, all acting with semi-autonomy. The single largest commonality of these seemingly independent warriors, their unshakable faith. The Vikings were strict followers of Norse paganism, perfect illustrations of which can be found within their maritime forces. As an example, it was not uncommon for Viking sailors to wear a type of hammer-shaped carving around their neck, representing Mjolnir, the weapon of Thor, the thunder god. This relic was believed to keep the warriors safe at sea. Additionally, religious beliefs had a tremendous effect on the battle tactics of the Vikings. In Norse mythology, all deaths were predetermined, and any man who fought honorably and fell with the sword in his hand could join the ranks of his blessed in Valhalla. As a result of this, the Vikings were often refused to surrender, and would happily attack with reckless and sometimes foolish tactics. Amongst the three civilizations that we studied, there were a multiplicity of differences. First of all, there's the use of the vessels themselves. The Vikings treated their longships as useful tools to facilitate efficient raids, and later as trading mechanisms used to move valuable goods. Contrastingly, the Koreans and Romans used large and unified fleets to protect not only their land but also their trade routes, essential and irreplaceable assets to any civilization. Furthermore, as Rome grew and expanded its navy, there was a considerable emphasis on making the ships larger, with increasing numbers of advanced weaponry constructed solely for engagements on the open sea. However, both the Vikings and the Koreans attempted to make their navies more agile and versatile, tailored to fit their environment. Lastly, while Rome stole the basis of their ship design from the Phoenicians, both Korean and Viking vessels were unique to their respective civilizations, at least for the most part. Although there are many differences between the Koreans, Vikings, and Romans, multiple similarities can be drawn between the naval forces of the three civilizations. First, both the Korean and Roman maritime forces were extremely structured, unified entities, both of which were controlled by a single ultimate power to whom they held unconditional loyalty, like an emperor. Additionally, an important similarity can be drawn due to the importance of judging these civilizations relative to their respective neighbors within their time periods. With the massive Roman military power and an increasing number of unique innovations, the Romans were massively ahead in terms of naval and military power for their time. In the same fashion, Korea possessed by far the most advanced navy in the region for their time period. In fact, the turtle ship was long regarded as the earliest armored ship in existence.
Finally, the Vikings, Romans, and Koreans all had a navy which emphasized hand-to-hand combat. The Romans had an obligation to defend the ship in the event of a boarding, and the Vikings just about did everything in close-range physical combat. And the Koreans, after using superior cannons at a distance, would often charge the opposition and aggressively board enemy ships. The Navy has consistently proven itself to be a key player in the continual protection and survival of many civilizations. It provided key illustrations of the politics, religion, environment, ideals, and overall culture of their society. It changed the course of history. As the infamous lawyer James Wiles puts it, the Navy is the most important defense of the country, in which every subject has an interest of the deepest character.